Välkommen allesammans! The gay Vikings. There's a lot of lies going around from both sides about this, about the subject, people putting their modern views about what they want to believe about history. You have on one side that there were no gays in the Viking Age, and if there were, they would be executed, and that's of course not true. And then we have people on the other extreme online talking about Norse culture, saying not only were same-sex couples accepted in the Viking Age, but they actually go as far as saying it was encouraged back then. As usual, I'm here to piss off both sides with the facts. And also, as usual, the truth is somewhere in the middle of the two extremes. And this is the first video in a three-part series that are going over all the sources to give us the truth about our history.
Yep. For as long as I have been involved in discussions of Viking Age society, this has been an issue and a question that it rises from time to time, and it needs some clearing up. So good initiative from Norse Magic and Beliefs, which is the channel we are watching today. I will put a link in the description if you want to see the video without my talking. Today's video is not a reaction kind of video. It's I'm not reacting to him personally or the channel, or I actually like the channel. I've been subscribed for a couple of years now, and he's a good guy, has some good things to say, messes things up sometimes, but I'm not reacting to him, absolutely not. I am going to be checking the facts in this video and in what he's saying, checking his sources, see are they good sources or bad sources, or is he interpreting them correctly. Not only to fact check his content, because that's not what I'm doing, more to go over the sources used and how they are most often interpreted, and to see if it's good or not good. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do all of his 3 episodes. So yeah, keep watching.
So in this first video here, we're just speaking about the legal sources, and this one is pretty plain and pretty fair, going over nothing but the old law codes that we have records of. The second part of the series, though, in the next video, that's going to piss some people off, because it's going to be debunking the lies that they have been pushing forward on all over social media the past few years. And the third part and final part of the series is going to make most people happy, going over the actual mentions we have of anything suggesting any LGBTQ, all those kinds of traits or clues that might have happened in the Norse sources and how they were actually viewed in society. And that is different than what the laws say. Very important that people understand this. As I mentioned, we're going over the law codes in this video that has something to do with the subject. Just be aware that the laws that a ruling power decides to implement does not often reflect what the actual citizens of a population believe. We have seen countless examples of this in the past couple of years, of government making laws and not giving a damn about what the people really think about it. This happens today. Same thing happened in ancient times. Also note that...
Yeah, that's true, of course. The laws only tells us what the laws said, not what people actually thought about it. So yeah, that's correct. Besides all that, something else you have to be aware of is that when you read these old documents or texts or sources, you have to remember that in Scandinavia, which is what we're talking about here, all the laws were written down by Christians. Doesn't matter if it's the oldest law that we can find, it's still written down by a Christian. So, for example, the Icelandic law, the Grógós, that was brought to Iceland in 930 CE, orally, and wasn't written down until 1117 by a Christian. And by 1117, Iceland had been Christian for over 100 years. So that should have some kind of effect. There were also rewritings of that law in the 1120s, 1130s. And the oldest manuscript we have of that text is from the 1260s, when Iceland had been Christian for 250 years. So you can imagine how many changes could have snuck into those texts during those hundreds of years. And the oldest law text we have from a Scandinavian society is the Gulating law from Norway. And that was actually the law that was brought over to Iceland in 930. So the Gulating law is supposed to be from 900, somewhere around. And the oldest manuscript we have from that law, the oldest one, is also from the 1260s. So when Norway had been Christian for almost 300 years. So keep that in mind. So even if you look at the oldest of the texts, they are still transcribed and written down in a Christian society by a Christian. So there has been things going on before pre-Christian and post-Christian. So you have to keep that in mind, even if you go to the absolutely oldest sources we have.
A lot of these law codes I'm going over are recorded after the Christianization of the society in Middle Ages or Antiquity, some of them. So a lot of people argue there, the traditional misconception, oh well, Christian beliefs disapprove of gays, so automatically that means pagans encourage same-sex relations, which has no basis.
Yeah, that is also true. Christianity does not work like that. When they came to places like Scandinavia, they did not take the pagan laws and turn them upside down to put in opposite laws. That's not even logic. What they did was they took the pagan laws and made small changes here and there to make the pagan laws fit better into the biblical context. So the law itself can be an old pagan law, a pagan view of things, but it has a cloak of Christianity over it. So for Christianity to take over a place like Scandinavia as fast as it actually did, they kept pretty much of the pagan and just Christianized it a bit. So meaning you can have your old laws and your old ways, just do it with this little change and everything's fine. That's pretty much what they did. Maybe they took away some parts or changed bigger issues in the law text. Maybe, possibly. We don't know that. We will never know that. But they did not just turn everything upside down and do the exact opposite. That's not how it works.
This on any evidence at all. They're just thinking in terms of contrast, which is not academic or a logical argument in any way. The reality is many of these laws recorded in Christian times were based on much older oral tradition of pagan law. It's just that we have very few written records from pagan times, so we're just not sure. But throughout history, all over the world, gays really haven't been treated that well. It's wrong. And in fact, you will see in a minute that gays seem to get even harsher punishments in the pagan times or the first few years after the Christianization, and then after Christianity comes in and establishes establishes itself over a couple hundred years, the punishments against gays were actually getting more lenient. So, on to...
I don't agree with that. Christians being more lenient on sexual issues, that sounds very strange. And the laws of that time, the old laws, they actually didn't mention gay or same-sex relationships or anything like that at all. What they do mention is shameful behavior. And that is a very wide word to use, because that can include anything, really, that is supposedly not beneficial for society, or something that people just didn't like, generally. So I would not say that Christianity came in with more lenient views on sexual issues, because as we all know, Christianity and sexuality doesn't really go together. And the base of that is that in Christianity, and probably Judaism too, sex has to lead to pregnancy. That's the point of having sex. You don't have sex for pleasure or just to pass time or whatever. Because if you have sex, you have to have a pregnancy following that sexual act. And the base for this has been the base for millennia, since it was written, probably. In Genesis 38, the story of Onan, and that when, I don't really remember the full story, but Onan's brother had a wife and he couldn't get her pregnant, so God says to Onan, you should get her pregnant, and he thinks, no, that's wrong, it's not going to be my child, so he spills his seed outside of his brother's wife, and God's not pleased with that, so he kills him. And that's the base for the Christian view, that sex should lead to pregnancy, and if it doesn't in any way, and in any way means masturbation or sodomy or whatever, if it doesn't make a pregnancy, then God will be displeased, and that's therefore not allowed in Christianity. That's where it comes from. So I think that Christianity being more lenient towards sexual activity that doesn't lead to pregnancy is not true at all. And we also see additions to the old laws that are implemented by bishops and very high up Christian persons that actually is worse than the old laws. So I do not agree with that statement.
The sources here. The sources from the Viking Age, though, are a bit limited, so I'm including laws from other parts of Germanic Europe here, because all of us had essentially the same culture, religion, language, beliefs, if we go far back enough in time.
If we go far back enough in time, then how far should we go back in time? If we go to Indo-Europeans or Proto-Indo-Europeans, then we're basically the same people as the people in India. So how far back in time do you want to go? As you can see, this this episode of this series is called Gay Vikings. So how far back in time do you want to go to find evidence? Viking Age officially started in the 8th century, in 780 something, with the first that the Viking Age start is based on the first attack on England by Danish Vikings, or the Danish people, or the Herada land they came from. So I wouldn't go further back than the 700s to find evidence. If we go further back in time than that, then we come to the Migration Age, and we don't know what peoples went where and came from where in the Migration Age. If we go further back than that, then you're in the what we in Scandinavia call the Roman Iron Age, or the pre-Roman Iron Age, and that's a mess of peoples wandering all over the place, all over Europe, going here and there and settling and making tribes, people's laws, mixing cultures. If we go further back than that, then you're in the Bronze Age, and now we're talking about a completely different society. We don't really know who was where in the Bronze Age. We know about the Goths and the Germanics around 2000 years ago. Much further back than that I shouldn't go at all. But if we're talking about the Viking Age, I shouldn't go further back than maybe 500-600 CE. So how far are we going to take this?
The oldest one comes in Tacitus Germania. Now this is really the main text that shows this type of thing. It was a Roman historian who wrote about the Germanic tribes in the 1st century, and this is where we all stemmed from at this time. The Vikings, the Saxons, the Longobards, the Angles, the Dutch, everyone.
As I said just now, we all stem from these Germanic tribes. Well, do we? How do you know? I don't know how far back he went. It seems like he goes back to Tacitus. That's about 2000 years ago. So what's the difference between a Goth and a Germanic 2000 years ago? And concerning Tacitus, we don't even know what people he was visiting, if he actually was visiting anyone at all. Did he go to the Goths? Did he go to a Germanic tribe? And what Germanic tribe? Was it South Europe, East Europe, West Europe, North Europe? Where? Who? What? When? How many tribes were there? We have no idea. So, yeah. That's a very bold suggestion to say that we all stem from whoever Tacitus possibly maybe met or didn't.
Living today in Germanic-speaking countries, all descend from these Germanic tribes, but in this source, Tacitus writes that all Germanic peoples had punishment for certain offenders, or they were executed by being drowned in a bog and pressed down so they couldn't ever resurface. And these included offenders like cowards, deserters, and as the word says here, corporis infames. Now, this word has been translated so many different ways. I see it translated in some texts as homosexuals, sodomites, those who disgracefully abuse their bodies or do notorious or infamous things with their bodies, or unnatural prostitutes it's translated to sometimes. Look, people are going to believe...
Okay. I'm not an expert in Latin in any way. I have studied Latin about 30 years ago or so. One thing I do know with both Latin and any other language, basically, you can take a modern language, it still applies. You can't take one word, put it out of context and try to translate it. That's very hard to do. So, corpore infames. Corpore, just that word has problems. It's just something physical. It's a body of some sort, not explicitly human body. Corpus, for example, is an object, can be an object, it also can be a human body. Like in corpus delicti, for example, is a term still used by the police today. That means the weapon of choice. So some kind of physical thing used in a context for some purpose is a corpus. Corpus can also be used for bigger things, like a mass of people or a building or something, whatever. So corpore, bodily, physical, a body of some sort, some kind of object that is physical, basically. Infame, I would translate more like dishonoring, or inhonestus is another Latin word for it, dishonoring. So not really. Infamis I should translate to ill reputation of some kind, to have a bad reputation, or to be insulting to someone or be insulted by someone. So it's bad. Infamis is not something bad. So again we come back to what I said before with shameful, the shame being the key. Or something bad, something not wanted. I would not personally translate corpore infamis to homosexual, because that translation depends on context. And we're now talking about people, and let's go back to his little sign there. No better sign there. The mode of execution varies according to the offense. Traitors and deserters are hanged on trees. Cowards, shirkers, and corpore infames. So cowards and shirkers, that would be lazy people. I don't know if that word's used that much anymore in the English language. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not English speaking. So we're talking about cowards and shirkers and other people of shameful behavior. Not explicitly, I don't read this text as cowards, lazy people, and gays. That's a very direct attack on one specific group, as cowards are a wide group, lazy people is a wide group, and gays specifically. Doesn't make sense. And what Tacitus is talking about here is that shameful behavior should be tucked away, hidden. But traitors and deserters should be publicly exposed. That's what he's talking about. So if you translate corpore infamis to sodomites specifically, or homosexuals specifically, that doesn't make sense. But the translation he has there with those who disgracefully abuse their bodies, I can agree with that. That would be shameful behavior. Shameful, notorious acts involving the body. Yeah, that's a better translation. Unnatural prostitutes, I don't even know what it means with that, or whoever translated that. Unnatural, what's a natural prostitute and what's an unnatural prostitute? It could require some thinking. Yeah, but I still don't think that you should translate it as gay people. I think that disgracefully abuse their bodies is more in line with the shameful behavior that should be tucked away and hidden, that you don't want to have. So yeah, that would be my translation of it. The someone who does something with their bodies, maybe or their person or reputation that is not wanted in a structured, well-structured society, basically.
Abuse their bodies or do notorious or infamous things with their bodies, or unnatural prostitutes it's translated to sometimes. Look, people are going to believe whatever translation of this they want to believe according to their own biases. I'm not going to speak about it and say what my opinion is because I'm not educated in Latin. But Old Latin and many languages back then didn't even have an established...
I'm sorry to interject, but what is Old Latin? And if we have Old Latin, then what is New Latin? As far as I am aware, Latin hasn't changed, except for medical Latin, which isn't really Latin per se, but Old Latin. Okay? Latin is Latin. Please object if you don't agree with that.
Recognized word for gay or same-sex relations or people, so something like corporis infames or something similar to that is about as close as they had as these types of things. Also, a point that a lot of people make about this text is, oh, Tacitus' work was Roman propaganda, it used to make other cultures sound more barbaric, and it's all lies. That's a little bit true, yeah. Tacitus definitely told lies to make people sound worse in order to justify the Roman invasions and the horrible things that the Romans did at the time. However, in this very same work that Tacitus wrote, or Agricola, he wrote that the Celts living in Gaul preferred actually to...
Agricola, or Agricolae. Sorry, just correcting the misspelling, probably unintentional.
Lie in bed with other men, and the Germanic peoples executed gays. So we have numerous other Roman and Greek sources like this too, saying the same thing, that the Celts accepted same-sex acts and the Germanic tribes did not.
I have to stop him there again. This is something you see very often with people who are not used to reading or searching for sources. Numerous sources. You want to believe that numerous sources mean that more people are saying the same thing, therefore building a larger base for what the truth is. But Romans and Greeks at that time, they copied other people's works. So most of the writers, or the history writers back then, based their works on someone else's older work. So numerous sources back then, if you're talking about Roman or Greek, the numerous sources would rather be one or two sources that was added on. So a new edition of a source would be an old source with corrections and new found added information. So an upgrade of the older source. So even if you have 10 sources, maybe one or two of those sources are old and original. The rest of them are add-ons to those sources until you get someone starting over from the beginning. So numerous sources in this case does not mean a wider base for the truth. It just means that they added more information along the way as they covered more information. That's how it works. So
it's wrong. You can't execute someone in the bog because they want to sleep with another man. People should do with their bodies what they want and sleep with who they want. I believe in unconditional freedom as long as you're not hurting anyone else or forcing your views on anyone else. That's my only opinion on the whole subject. But we can't just make up lies about history. We have to accept it and move on and learn from it.
Interesting that you said we can make up lies about history, because that's exactly what the Roman writers did. If you read Julius Caesar's texts about his travels, not much truth in that. So that's a very old source, not valid. Maybe some of it is valid, but not much of it is valid, because it's mostly fantasies and made up fiction. And Tacitus, even if Tacitus is used often as a pretty good source, he wrote about Germanic tribes before Rome was Christian. So if you know about Roman history in those times, the Germanics and the Romans weren't exactly friendly with each other. The Germanics were the Romans' biggest, by far, enemy. And for a Roman rider to go into Germanic territory would be a very daring expedition to begin with. Maybe they let him in to some areas of their territory, but probably Tacitus, if he went there at all, probably didn't go very far into Germanic territory. I absolutely doubt that he came to the Danube area. That's a bit too far. He could have done, absolutely, he could have, but I doubt it. So Tacitus' texts are probably stories told to him by people who had been there. And in Rome, in this time, Romans used Germanic people as soldiers. We know that. So there were Germanics in Rome, in the Roman territory at this time. They probably told him that's an easy way to get information. Talk to the people who's already there. Just, hey, you're Germanic. How does this work? Tell me, and I'll write it down. Step 1. Step 2, talk to someone, maybe Roman or Gaul or Celt, that had been in Germanic territories. Step 3, go there yourself, which we can discuss forever if he did not. Some people say he did, some people say he didn't. I think it's somewhere in between. I think he went into Germanic territory, but not very far. So, you can't take Tacitus you have to take him for what it is, in context of how things worked in his time. Not all of what he says is lie, and not all of what he says is true. It's somewhere in between, with some additions to make it sound better, maybe. And just considering the relations between Germanics and Romans, if Tacitus actually was allowed into some kind of Germanic area, why would they tell a Roman writer exactly about their culture? So, and thereby spilling their secrets to Rome, that Rome then could use against Germanics. They weren't stupid. So, yeah, take it with a pinch of salt. If you read Tacitus, it's not all true, it's not all wrong. It's somewhere probably in between, with some fabrication added for, the literary. You have to enjoy reading it too. So, Be careful with Tacitus. Just saying that. Yeah.
So you guys can have whatever opinion you all want on this, that's fine, but really the only people that I'm interested on hearing their opinion is if you're educated in old Latin and you can prove actually that you have no bias on this subject. Then I would be interested in your opinion on the translation of Corporis Infamus. Other than that, I don't even want to hear it.
Yeah, I don't know if you're watching this, but I just gave you my interpretation of Corporis Infamus, and I say that even if many years have passed since I studied Latin, I know enough about it to make translations, for at least for myself. And I know how Latin works. I know how the people who spoke Latin in those days thought and worked. I know enough about it. And my bias is to find the truth. Of course, I'm biased towards the Norse for obvious reasons, but when you do research, if you want to be a serious researcher, you have to follow the research and go where it leads you. And you have to take it for what it is. So if you have a preconception of what you want to be true and start researching and start to ignore things that go against what you want to be true, then you're a bad researcher. You have to follow the research, follow the tracks, the footsteps of history. You have to, because what you find will be what's there. And if you don't do that, then you're biased in a bad way. You can still be biased and following research, but my bias is to find the truth. I want to know. I want to find out the truth. So that's my bias. And this is something you learn very quickly when you start studying archaeology or history or whatever. You learn very quickly that what you think is mostly wrong, and what you want to believe is mostly wrong. And your research, the facts will lead you somewhere else. And those are the facts you have to believe and use in your research to continue researching. So that's my bias. If my translation wasn't good enough for you, then tough luck. That's what I have for you, but there you go.
Next source, let's fast forward a few hundred years. This is the time where the Germanic tribes were starting to split up more and form into larger kingdoms instead of small tribes. The Angles, Saxons, Franks, Goths, Frisians, and so on. Many of these kingdoms were starting to form and develop laws, and eventually they converted to
I'm pretty sure that they had laws before they started constructing larger kingdoms. I don't think that the kingdom is necessary for laws to be written. So that's a weird thing to say.
Christianity and adapted Christian law. And according to Christian law at the time, in the Roman Empire, they have a series of laws promoted from 342 to 390 by Christian Roman emperors, brand new. They had called for burning at the stake those guilty of same-sex relations or bestiality or sodomy or incest, those types of things. But most of the Germanic kingdoms, who were not really part of Rome at that time...
What? The Germanic kingdoms that weren't really a part of Rome at that time. In what time was any Germanic kingdom part of the Roman Empire? As far as I know, Rome never conquered any Germanic areas. If you know of some, then please let me know. But that's kind of the big thing with Rome. They never conquered the Germanics. So no Germanic kingdom was ever under the rule of the Roman Empire.
They did not adopt this among other laws called for by the Holy Roman Empire. The Germanic kingdoms may...
The Holy Roman Empire. That's another thing. That's another thing. Now we're talking about Catholicism. The Roman Catholic or the Orthodox Catholic. not the same thing.
Maintained their own legal practices for the most part at this time, which relied on much older oral tradition. Now, they were not very nice to gays either, but they reserved different punishments for them other than the church did. That's why most scholars have suggested that this disapproval of same-sex acts was not something brought on just by the Christian church at the time. It was already in Germanic culture originally, even though many of these laws are recorded quite a bit after the so-called official Christianization of the Germanic people. A couple sources here. This one is about the Longobards, a large Germanic tribe who settled Italy and actually kept their own Germanic law for their people in Rome when they were living besides Romans who had their own laws. But this source is not a law code really, but it has multiple mentions here that we can learn from. Multiple times we see depictions of the Longobardic word ariga, and this had multiple meanings. I've seen it translated as cowardly, effeminate, worthless, sodomite, these kinds of things. This is a close relation to the Old Norse words ergi or argir, which I will speak about in just a minute. But yeah, no signs in Longobard history that gays were punished under Longobardic law, but it was definitely not accepted. It was a grave insult to call someone that, as you see here.
Okay, the Historia Langobarda is not a law text. It's a history writing, just like Tacitus. And the Longobards means the Longbeards lived in modern day Italy. According to themselves, they came from South Scandinavia in the 6th century. But I don't know. Yes, Germanic people, yes, but they had evolved quite a bit from where they came from at the time. So when you take a tribe or a people and move it from an area like Scandinavia, which is far up north, to an area like Italy, which is very far down south, that movement should have taken a while, and during that movement they would have mixed with other cultures, picked up things, got rid of other things, and made small changes here and there. So the Longobards are not representative of Germanic peoples. The Longobards are representative of Longobards, basically. And the quote that he has that he had up a second ago, that's not a law text, that's a history or a story. And that story goes that a man called Ferdulf, a man tricky and conceited, paid some Slavs to invade his land so that he could chase them away and prove his strength as a leader. Skuldahis, or also called Argait, the ruler of that place under Ferdulf, chased them but failed to catch them. Ferdulf then calls Argait a coward for his failure. The story ends with both Ferdulf and Argait attacking the Slavs in anger, and both men die a very unbrave death as they attacked in rage, competing with each other about who was the bravest. So this story has nothing to do with homosexuality. This story is more about being cowardly or being a failure, to fail your mission and to not be brave. Some people want to read in homosexuality in this story just because of the use arga. But arga is a wide term for many things. It's a so-called homonym. And if we look at this story, Ferdulf calls Argait a coward for his failure. His mission was to prove his strength, or his leader's strength, against the Slavs. But he failed. So in that context, can you really say that he called him gay for failing? If you look at military history, I think that you can find many military forces with gay people in them that were brave soldiers nonetheless, because that had nothing to do with it. So what Ferdulf is calling Argait is a coward. He's a failure, or maybe a traitor, or an enemy of the state. Maybe that's far-fetched, but... And he also says that something like, how can you be brave, you whose name is based on the word coward? So this story is about failure and cowardly behavior. And being the coward in this case was that he failed, and he was a coward because he couldn't catch the Slavs, who were actually paid to be caught in the first place. So he didn't just fail, he failed miserably. And about this word arga, this story is written down by Paul the Deacon. He wrote the Historia Langobardum, and he used old Lombard sources when he wrote this. He did not go up to Germania to find words to write his story about the Langobards, who were Germanic, because he used the original Lombard or Langobardic, I don't know how to say that, their own sources were with their own language that maybe he didn't really understand, who knows. And if he wrote it in Latin and suddenly used a word from another language, it's because that word was in that original story that he couldn't translate to Latin, and therefore he used the original word. So if it comes from Germanic, that's probably true, because they were Germanic people and they had a Germanic language, a language that probably had changed since they left Scandinavia, if they came from Scandinavia. But to use that word in the same way as in a much later Scandinavian story from the 800s, maybe the word had changed its meaning a bit. And as I said, the word arga can mean many things. It can mean anything from shameful to cowardly to failure to traitor to a lot of things. It has been interpreted as meaning homosexual or shameful sexuality or sodomy or something like that. But it probably means something closer to dishonorable or dishonorable shame, shameful behavior. I wouldn't translate it to gay specifically. And if you read the story, it's about failure. So why would he call him gay? And why would he even have a name based on the word gay? That's pretty strange. So yeah, let's go.
Next is something called the Benedictus Levita in the 8th century. It's a document found in Mainz, Germany, in the Saxon territory, and that prohibits same-sex relations, but it doesn't list any punishments for it there. So it's a problematic source because we don't know who wrote it or how old it is, but it's definitely not a Christian edition, it seems, because it seems to be quite a bit older than when Charlemagne came in and brought Christianity and started forcing on people there. So,
okay. Benedictus Levita is a set of forgeries. It's fake. It's not true. So, bad source. Don't use a source if it's a known forgery. Just check the validity of the source before you use it. The Benedictus Levita was written by a Frankish priest under the command of another Frankish priest called Archbishop Otgar. And Otgar died in 847, so it's written before 847, obviously. Charlemagne lived between 740, 742 and 814. So yeah, not that far between those. We're talking about 40 years between. But Benedictus Levita is a forgery, so don't use it as a source whatsoever. It's fun to read, but it's not valid. And not Christian. It's very Christian. It is written by a Frankish priest, so very Christian indeed.
In that area, same-sex relations illegal, but no punishment is known for it. Next one, we have a very harsh punishment from a little bit later on in time. In Lex Visigothum, you would get a banishment and castration if you were found guilty.
Wait, what? Later in time? Benedictus Levita was from the 800s and Lex Romana Visigotorum is from the 600s, so that would be previous, maybe?
Of all sexual crimes that they said were considered unnatural, such as male sexual relations, anal sex, both heterosexual and homosexual, and bestiality. Now this here was the Visigoths, a Germanic people who set up their kingdom in Spain area and Italy and kind of all over Europe, but anytime from the year 400 to 700.
No, wait. The Visigoths, that's the Roman name for these people. Visi in Visigoths means west, countering the Ostrogoths, which means east. So we have the West Goths and the East Goths. Visigoths were in the west. They were in Spain and in France, not Italy so much. So yeah.
This source is also a bit difficult because this law code actually combined the much older tradition of Roman and Catholic and Germanic law into one, so we don't know where this harsh treatment of gays came from.
Yeah, I can tell you exactly where it came from. It did not mix all of these laws or rules at all. Lex Romana Visigotorum was completed by Alaric II in 506 CE. And this law governed relations between Romans and Visigoths. That means that this set of laws was aimed at Roman citizens living among the Visigoths in the Visigoth territory. So this law didn't apply to Goths or Germanics whatsoever. It was applied for Roman citizens living amongst the Visigoths. And let's take a look at his. Didn't he have a text here somewhere? No. Okay. It prohibits bestiality and weird sex activity. But if you just stop and think, why would the Romans write laws for Roman citizens living among another people? How I interpret that, and feel free to put in your own interpretation here. This is my interpretation. The Romans made this law for the Roman citizens living among the Visigoths, basically saying, they do these things, you shouldn't, because then you won't be considered a Roman citizen anymore. That's how I interpret it. Why else would the Romans write special laws for Roman citizens living among the Goths? Make sense?
But that's just one source there. Last one from a little bit later on in Frisia. This is a couple hundred years after the Frisians were Christianized, but the Frisians actually did retain most of their original rule and law. The Frisians were very independent, even though they were part of Rome at the time. And it says here, breaking laws of Octavianus and Moses and the whole world would get 3 choices. They could be burned alive, buried alive, or self-castration. So that is definitely not pleasant at all, and definitely not a fair thing to do at all. But yeah, this seems to be a Christian law, of course, but we don't know if it's older.
It is a Christian law. It doesn't seem to be a Christian law. It is a Christian law. The Frisian law, called the Rustringer Sendrecht. This wasn't applied to Germanics in that sense, because the Frisians, as I said, was Christian at the time, so then they were not considered to be Germanic anymore. Germanic and pagan was sometimes mixed as one, because when the Germanic people became Christian, they were considered to be a part of the Holy Roman Empire. That is the Catholic, Roman Catholic congregation. I don't know English. It was not about the Norse. It was not about the Germanics. This law concerned Frisians who in some way participated in the actions of the Vikings. That means if they volunteered to join a Viking mission, this law applied to them. If they were kidnapped or captured by Vikings and forced to join a mission, this law applied to them. So this did not apply to the Norse or Vikings or Germanics. It applied to the Christian Frisians who in some way participated by force or freely of the Vikings. So this law isn't really, it doesn't really matter if we're talking about gay Vikings or gay in Germanic law, because this is not Germanic law. This is a Christian law written for Christian Frisians that engaged with non-Christian Vikings. That's what it is. And just to say that, he said the laws of Octavianus or Moses. That means Octavianus is of course the Emperor Augustus or Gaius Octavius. So the laws of Octavius or Moses means Roman law both before Christianity and after Christianity. So Roman law from beginning to end. That's what that means.
So those are just some of the Germanic ones that prohibit or say something about same-sex relations, but there's also some that have no
I don't agree there. In all of these laws he's taken up, I don't see anything that specifically or explicitly mentions same-sex interactions. What he's talking about, most of these texts, what they're talking about is unnatural sex, or shameful behavior, or using your body in a shameful way. So, what is unnatural sex? That could be whatever. That could be public masturbation. It could be anal sex that didn't lead, or oral sex that didn't lead to a pregnancy, and therefore unbiblical in that sense. Sexual fetish could be shameful behavior, like licking someone's feet and get sexual pleasure from that. That's unnatural sex. So unnatural sex can be whatever, and shameful behavior can be many things. So none of these texts actually mentions same-sex relations whatsoever. So I don't agree.
Mention of it, such as these right here. These are other Germanic law codes that have no mention of same-sex relations. So law could have varied from place to place, and also the time period. But to learn a bit more, we're going to look into the Norse law codes from the Viking Age. In the Norse sources, we actually find a lot more punishments for those who accused others of same-sex acts than the actual sexual act itself being illegal. First one is the Grógos laws, the laws of Iceland. We have them preserved in the 13th century text, but the original they think was established in the early days of Icelandic settlement, which was still pagan times. And it says here, if a man calls another man Rager, Ströðin, or Surðin, he shall prosecute as for other verbal insults. A man also has the right to kill for these words. Now, these words basically refer to someone who liked to take it up the bum. So if anyone called you a Surðin, if someone said that you did in fact like to take it up the anus, or you had done so in the past, in the Viking Age, you would have the legal right to kill that person. Just
again, I do not agree. In the translations and versions of the Grógos I have read, I have not found any of these words anywhere. And there's a pretty good explanation for that. I don't know what sources he's reading from or what translation he's reading, but it don't seem to be very good. Because Ströðin and Surðin are both words from Streda. Streda and Serda, both kind of the same word, just change the letters a bit. I don't know what it's called in linguistics, but it happens. Streda means to work hard, or toilsome work in some way. That's what it means. So again, we have a word that can be used for many different things depending on context, and context is the key in reading sources. There is a medieval runic inscription from in Oslo, Norway. I think it's 13th century something. I don't know exactly the date of it, but 13th century. That says Oli Ströðin I rassin. That's the runic inscription. That is translated to Ole is eft in the behind, to use better words. And you have to read this in context. If Ole is hard worked in his butt, what could that mean? Well, it can't be translated as anything else than sexual. So that would be male homosexuality, if the case was not that someone had performed this act to poor Oli, who then was shamed for it, because the passive part in a sexual relation was the shameful one. The active part was not shamed at all. So this could be a slander. Just that, someone trying to defame this Oli person. Or it could mean that Oli liked this action to be taken on him, and in that case he would be gay. So context. There's also a runic inscription in Maes Howe in the Orkney Islands. That's 12th century. Quite a lot of them actually. But one of them is the one that has... There are two inscriptions from Maes Howe that has gained attention because they are outside the regular runic inscriptions that we find. And one of them says Thorni Sard Helgi Reist, and that means Thorni eft and Helgi carved. That's hard to translate. It has been translated like Thorny, which is a female name. She eft, while Helgi carved. So use your imagination how that could work. He was carving runes and she was performing some kind of sexual thing on him. It can also be interpreted that Thorny, the female, did the effing somewhere else while Helgi at this place carved, so maybe not with each other. And this, of course, can be implicated as a sexual act. Doesn't have to be, but it can be, and in this case they have translated it to being just a sexual act. But the interesting thing here is, if what he says is true, that Sodin and Strodin would mean homosexuality, then how come Helgi, the male, and Thorni, the female, how did they perform a homosexual act? It doesn't work. So his whole argument falls flat. It could also mean that in Maes Howe, the believed story is that a expedition of Vikings were caught in a storm, so they couldn't keep on going in their ships, so they instead went into Maes Howe, which is an old, I think it's a Bronze Age barrow that was hollow, so they went in there to shelter themselves from the storm. And maybe Thorny worked hard with making a fire, or maybe closing the entrance so the storm and the rain wouldn't come into there. That could be one way to work hard, because that's what the word means. But if it means interpreted by the other runic translation that mentions female genitalia in a filthy way, that's why they translate it as the F word. So she could be working hard with something else, not only a sexual activity. But in any case, here we have a female and a male doing this word, which means that it's not specifically homosexuality we're talking about with this word, as we see in the Oli transcription, where Oli is a male name and he is hard worked in his bottom. So that would imply homosexuality, unless the case is that he is being defamed as a weakly, cowardly, feminine man who has been punished by someone by being forced to take the passive part in a homosexual relation. That could also be the case, and then it's not homosexuality, then it's just defamation. So yeah, so words with dual meanings, homonyms, this word, streda, serda, strodin, sordin, homonym, has to be translated in context. Because if you had a picture by this inscription of a woman doing some kind of recognizable work, it would just mean that she's working hard, or a man doing some kind of recognizable work. That would just mean that he's working hard. He's a hard worker. That would be honorable. But in this case, it's translated to a sexual act and therefore maybe dishonorable. So you have to translate it in context. You can't just pull one word from a whole sentence out of its context and try to translate it. That's not how language works anywhere. So if these words had been added to the Grogos, that if anyone calls someone a hard worker, he may be killed for it, that's just weird. That's strange. Why would a law text enable someone to be killed for calling someone else a hard worker? Because out of context, that's what the word means. It can only mean a sexual act in the sexual context. So I don't think that what he says, what he read, I don't think that's in any version of the Grogos law. I think that's someone's translation of it, freely translated.
For him slandering you. We have another similar law in Sweden from a bit...
Oh, but we have that slandering people or lying about people or falsely accusing people was outlawed in the Scandinavian societies. We have plenty of examples for that. That the usual punishment for falsely accusing someone or accusing someone of something that was that could defame them in some way or shame them in some way. The usual punishment for that was holmgång, a fight to the death, and whoever won that fight was considered to be right and the loser was considered to be guilty. So that was illegal, to defame someone, and still in the same way the key word here is shame and defamation. That was the outlawed part of it. The sexual thing, I haven't found that anywhere specifically.
Later on in time, says no man must say about another that he has submitted to disgrace. We have another one.
Well, again, context. Submitted to disgrace. Does that specifically mean being gay or having homosexual activities? I don't think so. Being submitted to disgrace is basically shaming someone or defaming someone. So, and what the word the law actually uses is okvädningsord, and that means words of disgrace. For example, saying, there's an example in one of the versions mentioning, for example, saying that you've seen a woman with her hair let out riding a fence gate while the trolls are watching. Yeah, that's an actual example of what words of disgrace means. And okväde, that means something that is demeaning and putting someone down verbally. Basically lying or shaming without cause or reason, actual cause or reason. That's what the law is talking about.
in the Jernsida laws of the 12th century. This was law that came around and unified Iceland and Norway under one law code. Same thing there. It prohibits saying that another man let himself submit to sodomy. But all these laws here...
Does it really say that? Let a man... What did it say? Let's go back.
Prohibits saying that another man let himself submit to sodomy. But
if the text actually says what he said, then it's a Christian addition. There's no reason for a pre-Christian society to use a Christian word in a law text. So if it said sodomy, it's Christian. I haven't read the Jernsida laws, or the Ironside. That's what it means. And the Jernsida laws are not really laws. Norway basically took Iceland under its command in 1262. So we're talking about 260 years after Iceland was Christian here. And put the Icelanders under Norwegian law. The Jernsida fragments are fragments of older Norwegian law texts that, together with other bits and pieces and fragments, were put together to the Gulating law that was carried orally to Iceland to make the Grågås law. So the Jernsida laws are fragments of some law bits and pieces that were valid somewhere in Norway before the Gulating law was written, put together to become the Gulating law, that was transferred orally to become the Grågås law. So you can say the Jernsida law, because there is no such thing as the Jernsida law. That Jernsida texts are fragments that are put together with other fragments from other parts of Norway to finally come together as the Norwegian Gulating law. Just saying.
all these laws here are not prohibiting gay sex, right? They're prohibiting slandering someone with the insult that they received gay sex. So was same-sex relations actually illegal in the Viking Age and after or before? We have one source.
No, they're not talking about gay sex. Gay sex has nothing to do with this. This is all about, all the Norse laws are about honor. To defame or shame someone, or disgrace someone, or falsely accusing someone of doing something shameful or disgraceful. That's what the laws are about. And that was punishable, no matter what it was. It was shameful to say that a woman had been seen with her hair let out at an inappropriate occasion, where you were supposed to be, fixed or put together, or words. It was also in the same way illegal to say that I have seen he or her together with the trolls doing weird stuff that I don't understand. That's slander, it's defaming, it's shameful, disgraceful, and truth was a very big thing in the Scandinavian pre-Christian societies. The truth was everything. If you lied or you broke an oath, you could actually be excommunicated for breaking an oath. That was one of the bigger laws there were. Breaking oaths and lying and shaming someone else, falsely accusing someone of doing something shameful or disgracing. That was the punishable part. Then we don't know if that included same-sex relations. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but it didn't say so explicitly. So you have to read in context and understand the language and the general context around what the laws are talking about.
Explaining that, and that is actually the oldest one, the Gulathing, which is Norwegian law code that we have preserved records of from the 1200s, but originates in the 900s in pagan times. And here it says, if a man enjoys the pleasures of the flesh of anything other than a woman and are accused and convicted of it, they shall suffer permanent outlawry and have their possessions be confiscated and belong to the king. So,
yeah. Again, listen to the words you're saying. Flesh other than a woman. Does that specifically mean the flesh of a man? It can also mean the flesh of an animal. It can also be the flesh of yourself, meaning your hand, masturbation. You could put your genitals in a pumpkin or whatever. That is not the flesh of a woman. So what this law only says is the flesh other than a woman. Meaning what exactly? Not exact specifically gay or male on male sex. So what it said was, don't go around putting your penis in everything you find just because it's enjoyable, but rather do it in a woman that is more honorable and the right thing to do, is basically what it says. And what is said about the Gulathing law, Norwegian law, yeah, it is a Norwegian law from a part of Norway. The part that is now called Vestland, I believe. That's Hordaland and Sognefjordane. A small part of Norway, not Norwegian law. There were many Norwegian laws from many Norwegian areas, but the Gulathing law collected those laws for this area called Gulathing area. All other areas of Norway had their own laws that at some point in time, probably around the 900s, were put together to the Gulathing law. Not the entirety of all the other laws, but bits and pieces of the other laws, among others the Järnsida fragments. So yeah, just be aware of what it is, and it's not the Norwegian law that's wrong. Magnus Erlingsson and Bishop Øystein made, both Christians of course, made a lot of additions to the Gulathing law in the 12th century, the late 12th century. So they took big part of the non-Christian or pagan or older, not biblically based laws away and replaced them with Christian laws, and also added biblical law into the Gulathing law. And that's the version we have today available. So we have to be careful when we read it and not say that, oh, this is pagan law because it's written in the 900s. Well, Norway was basically already Christian in the 900s. So how Christian was it to begin with? And for us now to find the fragments of the pre-Christian law in that unified law is extremely hard. So we have to be careful when we read old sources, as I said in the beginning, because even if you find the oldest of the oldest sources, in this case the Gulathing law, which is the oldest law text we have from Scandinavia, how much of it is really pagan and how much of it has been rewritten in a Christian light? We don't know that. So just be careful and don't forget the context.
Here, the pitcher and the catcher were subject to punishment. But that's the only source we have anything.
Oh, but the pitcher and the catcher, that is actually one of the additions made by Erlingsson and Øystein. they put in a law actually, and this is the first time that it specifically mentions male sex with other males, so specifically homosexuality between men. And the punishment they put into that law, probably replacing some other law, if it wasn't a complete addition from in the original, that was also from the Bible, from Genesis, about Lot, when God saves Lot from Sodom, when he destroys Sodom. This law says that if they are accused of same-sex relations and convicted of that accusation, then they would be punished with a thing that is called jernbörda, which is iron burden. And that is a biblical thing based on the story of Lot and Sodom. Because one way to perform this iron burden punishment was to carry in your hand a glowing piece of iron for 9 or 10 steps without being hurt. You could also walk on glowing iron for a couple of steps and not being hurt or wounded. Your flesh wouldn't be wounded. And if you could carry this glowing piece of iron in your hand for 9 or 10 steps, if you were wounded, you were guilty. If you was unharmed, then you were free, not guilty. Which is the same kind of punishment as we see during the witch trials with the water test. They threw the witches into the water. If they sank, they were guilty and died. If they floated, they were a witch and was burned. So it's basically a lose-lose punishment. You can't win. This was the same thing with the iron burden. If you were punished with that, that was the punishment. You lost, no matter how. If you was not, if you weren't damaged by the glowing iron, that wouldn't happen. So there was only one outcome, and that was that you were guilty. So they basically said, you're guilty, now take this test to prove that you're guilty. You couldn't prove that you were innocent because you couldn't pass that test. It's impossible. You can't carry glowing iron in your hand and not take damage from it. That's one of the laws that the Bishop Øystein put in there. It's very Christian, based on a biblical story. So, and there you go. I think it's
saying
done.
like same-sex was actually illegal in Scandinavia at the time, and all those sources that I went over before, they're about all we have. Different laws from different times, different places, using various degrees of punishment for same-sex acts. So believe whatever you want.
Okay, I think it's done there. I don't think I found any punishments for same-sex acts, actually. I don't think that's what these sources talk about at all. I think they are all talking about, unless the Christian ones accept those, they're talking about generally shameful or disgraceful behavior. That's what and what you put into disgraceful behavior, that's up to you. That's something that a court would have to decide on. And I think that differed very much between different cultures or peoples or tribes. What was seen as this disgraceful or shameful behavior. And still today, laws are written to be interpreted based on context, which was the same as the laws were written back then, 500-600 years ago. They were written so that they can be interpreted in context for a variety of things. That's why they use so so big, large, big, wide terminology as shameful behavior or disgraceful behavior, because then they gave themselves, or the court or the jury had the opportunity to put whatever they wanted into that behavior and decide, is this shameful behavior or is it not? So when we're talking about the Roman laws, they had other words for homosexuality, both male and female, that they used. So if the Roman laws were talking about homosexuality, it would have used any of those words instead of just shameful behavior. So I think he tried his best. He uses sources, which is a good thing. Not many people do that, I have noticed. They use what they think are sources, but they don't actually go to the actual texts. But I would advise that he reads the sources before he uses them, and also tries to get into the context of the source. What message is this text trying to convey? That would be very helpful in his research, I believe. So I think he tried his best, but I also think he failed, because I don't find what he's talking about in the sources. So good video, made a good base for my video, of course. And no shame on him whatsoever. I haven't commented on him. If I have, that was not my intention. I only wanted to check his sources and fact check what the sources actually say. So next time we will look at part 2 and see what he has to say there. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any comments, just write them down below, and I would love to know if you find that anything I said was wrong. Being academic means that you also have to take comments and critique. That's a part of the academic work. So please, if you keep it clean, say what you think. I will read it and I will take it to my research. So yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.